to introduce Pam Diener. She's a developmental neuroscientist, anatomist, and pediatric occupational therapist. She's also on the board of directors at rettsyndrome.org, for which we are so grateful to have her depth on our board of directors and contributing to the strategic direction of our foundation. She's a professor in the Department of Physical Therapy at Marymount University and an associate professor at Georgetown University School of Medicine in the Department of Neuroscience and Biochemistry and Molecular and Cellular Biology. Pam's clinical and basic science research agenda primarily focuses on helping children with severe and profound neurologic disabilities to acquire and restore function by evaluating the effect of enriched purposeful and activity-based play on improving limb use and associated postural reactions. So prior to her academic and research positions, Pam worked as an OT at pediatric rehab hospitals in Baltimore, Boston, Washington, D.C. She's had a lot of field experience to really lend to her research and academic work today. Pam received her bachelor's in occupational therapy from Tufts University, her master's in anatomy from Boston University, and PhD in neurobiology from Georgetown University. In addition, Pam is the sister of an adult with Rett syndrome. So she brings a lot of experience to her talk today. We're very excited to hear about her practical experience as well. I can't wait for you to hear about the research that she has done in the area of enriched environments and the effect of occupational therapy interventions with our kids, and I know you're going to learn a lot from her today. So in the interest of getting all of the time, let's go ahead and turn the presentation over to Pam with a final reminder that if you have any questions for her during the presentation today, go ahead and submit them in the question text box, and we'll field them at the end. All right. Thanks very much, Pam. Thank you, Megan, for turning the screen over. And let's get started with meaningful, varied, enriched, activity-based, multisensory training, OT at its best.
Thank you, Paige. Hello, everybody. I want you to first take a look at this first slide that I gave to you today, which is just the title slide. And it sort of introduces the topic that I want to speak with you about today, the enrichment. So when you're looking at this title slide, you're probably quite bored. There's not a whole lot to look at. There's not a whole lot to get you excited about. But if I just throw in some fireworks, all of a sudden your eyes start moving, hopefully. You start thinking maybe about what it sounds like to have the fireworks going off, memories of going to the fireworks in the past with your family. And in the process, multiple areas of your brain are being stimulated simply by those simple fireworks that are stimulating you to do something beyond just stare. So you hopefully you're beginning to do some movement. So really, to get anyone to move, one of the things that we need to provide to them is a motivating and a desirable stimulus. And if you provide that, somebody wants to either move an arm towards that or whatever it may be, whatever body part needs to move, they want to move that body part in that direction. So you have to provide something that's motivating, something that the person wants, and they have to be able to actually move their body parts. When you move a body part, such as your arm, you move it forward. You activate automatically postural reactions, and those are the reactions that keep your trunk erect so that you can reach forward and not fall on your face when you do so. You also have to be able to achieve some end result, so some internal reward, perhaps you get food in your mouth, or an external reward, you get to touch the mobile as it's showing here with the little baby. The satisfaction has to be there, or you don't really want to move again. You're not going to choose to do that. So the other aspect to movement then is after something is motivating and desirable, and you've been able to move your body part towards it, and you activate the postural reaction so you actually get to the object that you intended to reach for, and you get the reward makes you want to do that again. And then you practice the skill over and over again. And through that constant practice, the movement becomes secure inside your nervous system. Subtleties, of course, of your hand position, exact arm position, the weight of the object that you're going to be holding are going to change. But still the idea of the reach is still present, and you've been able to move to get whatever it was that you wanted to obtain. So what happens then if you can't? move certain parts of your body and you're unable to reach. Then we still have to provide all of those things that internally and that you would normally self-initiate. We have to provide that for the person. So we need to provide a motivating and a meaningful task. We need to teach and train the person how to use the body parts that we want them to use. We need to therefore also train them not to fall over on their face or fall to their side as they're reaching in different directions, but we need to train the preparatory or the anticipatory postural responses. And of course, there has to be some internal or external reward for that person. And what's most important is that we have to vary the stimulus. Don't always present the same object to the person, because we'll end up what we call splintering a skill. When you splinter a skill, you do something like the old adage sort of in OT was put pegs into a pegboard all the time. And if you constantly are putting pegs into a pegboard, you learn that task really well. But can you transfer that task to picking up a quarter and putting a quarter into a vending machine? Usually not. So in order to train a task, and you have to provide various stimuli. So the person has to reach for and pick up various things and then do something with those objects. You're still reaching, you're still getting an approximate idea of what you're doing, but just subtleties are going to change. So occupational therapy has a huge role in movement in pediatrics. And there are a variety of ways that therapists help children. They help children that need to learn to move in ways that are based on certain theories that we learn about in school. And some of the theories I'm going to talk with you about today, and I'll get to that in a couple of slides further down the way. But the basic idea of what we're trying to do is to help children improve their quality of life. And in order to think about what that is for a child, we need to think about what children do. And children primarily learn through doing and through play. And they will learn how to bathe and dress and all of the other skills that we think about as adults for daily living skills. But the initial occupation, the initial activity of a child is to learn to play. And when they learn to play, that play item, whatever that toy might be, has to be motivating, whether it's a ball or some kind of a cause and effect toy. It needs to be motivating for them to want to grab it or to reach out for it. And when they do that, they gain postural control, they gain stability at their shoulders and at their hip muscles and all through their torso. And they also learn coordination. We are training them to not just get the ball in the same way each time, but we'll throw the ball from different directions. We'll throw the ball at different speeds, so the child learns how to improve their coordination, their dexterity, the speed and velocity at which they move. The task, as I said, has to always be meaningful, has to be varied, and the most important thing is we have to practice that task. And so that's why typically you won't see that an occupational therapist will see you once a month. Typically OT treatment is going to be anywhere from 1 to 3 times a week for each child, so that the idea of practice occurs and home programs are provided for the children so that more practice can occur at home. So as I said, the movement that we are going to be training needs to be motivating. Well, so what is motivating for a child? Well, it depends on what age they are. When we start early on in life, we really do a lot of cause and effect games. We can transfer that into children that are a little bit older by looking at switches with computers. It's still cause and effect, but it's not the simple infant toys that we saw initially. Music is extremely motivating to children, especially those with Rett syndrome. And so it's another activity that can be used to help children learn to move and want to move simply by even rocking their body to the rhythm of the music. We also want to look at textures early on in life when we're first developing. Our hands are as a baby, our hands are moving and playing with different things, whether you're with your mother's hair, your mother's face, what a caregiver, whoever it may be, has a variety of textures. We need to provide those textures to children so they can get that same experience if they're unable to self-initiate that on their own. We also use what we call therapy balls, great big balls that we can place children on to work on their vestibular reactions. But we can't just place a child on a ball, that would be boring, so you have to have more activities that are involved in that as well. And the therapist will talk with you, talk with parents, talk with other caregivers, talk with siblings about what they think the child really likes to do, and then they can begin to incorporate that into therapy. Above all, we really have to make sure that whatever we provide is the just right challenge. We don't want to make things too easy for the child, or they'll become bored of that and don't want to do it again. They don't want to practice. And you can't make an activity too difficult for the child, because if it's too difficult, they're not going to want to try because they're going to fail, and no one likes to fail repeatedly. So the just right challenge is what we do when we try to continually advance the challenge. As the child begins to become successful in a task that was difficult for them at one time, we advance that task one more step, and we get the child to continue to improve their abilities in whatever skills they're doing, if they're reaching, if they're working on postural control, if they're working on both skills at the same time. The more that we see what the child is capable of doing, the more we understand where we may need to intervene with some adaptations. Adaptive equipment is used in therapy not as a way to prevent the child from ever learning a skill, but once the child is beginning to learn a skill, just to help them go one step further. And I'm going to show you some ideas of that in a few moments when I talk to you about some of the things we can do with feeding as an example. Most of what OTs do is we follow two general theories. Sensory integration is one, neurodevelopmental therapy, or NDT, is another. And we also, and I'm going to talk with you more about those in a moment as well. We also use what we call adjunctive therapies. We can look at aquatic, playing with the child in the water and using our same goals, but to get a child to move in the water where there's much less resistance than there would be in the air, where gravity is pouring down on the child and often making it harder to move their bodies. And we also use hippotherapy. Hippotherapy is another activity that we can use as a means by which we can try to improve postural control. And with improved postural control, we get improved motion of the limbs for walking, for example, or for reaching. I'm going to begin to talk with you a little bit more detail about some of these topics that I've mentioned in this slide related to the theories and the adjunctive therapies in just a moment. But before we get there, what I think is really important to understand a little bit about is when we talk about movement, what are we really talking about? What is it that therapists are really going for? And what we're really looking at are the reflexes are your basic movements. So before you can actually do something skilled, like reach for an object and pick it up and put it in your mouth and chew it, before you can do all of that, we developed simple reflexes, what the spinal cord can do, what the brain stem can do, and I'm going to, again, get back to that in just a moment. Once we have these very simple reflexes, which just requires just a little bit of activity within the nervous system, we develop the next set of reflexes, which would be called primitive reflexes. Primitive reflexes are the reflexes that we see in children, babies, as they're developing. It's the reflexes, as you can see in this upper image here. This reflex is called the tonic labyrinthine reflex, but it doesn't matter. It's just the idea that this is a reflex where we place the child in a particular position, and the response of the child is that the head is up and the legs are up, simply just from being placed in a position where someone is holding them under the torso, lifts their head, and their legs go up. Another another reflex would be to put the head down, and if you put the head down, the legs start to bend or flex underneath of the body. These are reflexes. The nice thing about these reflexes is that they eventually, as we develop our movement and we move from not being able to do anything as an infant to learning how to come out of a sitting position, move into a crawling position, and then finally learn to stand. As the child learns to do that, these reflexes that we see up here become integrated. They don't just happen just because you stimulate them and you put them in a particular position. They only are now, those movements that we see of being able to bend the legs or bend the arms are only seen, like in this crawling position, when the child needs them, because information from the brain has come down and is commanding the nervous pathways that would normally cause a reflex to only work sometimes and only work in the way that they want, that the pathway should be working in order to produce crawling. So therapists start by thinking about these general basic reflexes, whether it's just a simple reflex or whether it's a primitive reflex, and we look at the idea that we see whether these are still present in children, and then we try, if they are present, we try to take the child through their developmental milestones, whether it's from a gross motor standpoint, or as you can see here with the hand, whether we're taking them from their early immature grasping patterns up to the maturity of holding a pencil properly to write. All of this requires that we wire the nervous system appropriately. The nervous system is going to naturally wire itself if you have a child that's typically developing and getting the typical sensation, stimuli, and responding appropriately. So with all of the proper stimulation and the proper movements, the child wants to continue to repeat these activities. And we there's a statement or a saying that has been used by several people, Carla Schatz and Hebb, that says that neurons that fire together wire together. So what that's saying is that we're reinforcing, we're practicing, and we're trying to say that whatever is going on in the nervous system is going to stay that way if we provide it with the proper input. So let me just backtrack for just a moment, and let's just look at what are simple reflexes. What exactly am I talking about? One of the very simplest reflexes that we see inside the spinal cord is something called the knee-jerk reflex, or a stretch reflex. The stretch reflex is based upon the fact that a physician typically will hit just below your knee to hit a tendon of your thigh muscles, your quadriceps, and it causes your leg to kick out. Well, that's what we see on the body, but what's happening internally there are neurons that are running into the spinal cord that have become stimulated by the fact that the knee was just tapped. And they activate other neurons inside the spinal cord. This picture right here is just a representation of a spinal cord section. And the lines that are coming in are representing the neurons or the nerve cells that are bringing the input from the muscle into the spinal cord. This would be the sensory input, the input that's coming in, that's telling the spinal cord, hey, this muscle was just stretched. And then those neurons will then inform other nerve cells inside the spinal cord that are called motor neurons or motor nerve cells that will go out to the muscle to stimulate it, to tell it to contract, to shorten, and that will cause the leg to kick out. That's a very, very simple reflex. If we know that some stimulation of a muscle will cause a leg to kick out, that's the very beginning of movement. We can use that in therapy to try to get a child to move that doesn't move normally. And you can put a ball in front of that leg and get the leg to kick out and hit the ball. The child then sees that, thinks that's fun, and then understands that they had an effect on that ball. And we can then begin to try to incorporate that in therapy and get the child to learn to kick on their own rather than having to stimulate it all the time. Another idea behind this type of a reflex is that idea of holding a cup. If you had a cup in your hand and the cup was empty, you might be able to keep it steady for a period of time. But if somebody starts filling that cup with water or some other substance, making it heavier, you may start to have the cup drop a little bit in your hand, just subtly. But you're able to recover without spilling that liquid and bring your hand back up to where it was. That is this stretch reflex happening functionally. That the stretch that occurred, instead of having a hammer hitting the right below the knee and hitting the tendon of this muscle, instead it's the weight of the cup that's causing your muscle, your bicep muscle, to become stretched as your elbow extends a little bit, as your elbow straightens. And that stretch causes you to pull your elbow back up so that the cup becomes steady and parallel to the floor again so that you don't spill the liquid. Another type of reflex that's in the spinal cord relates more to our pain sensations. It's called the withdrawal reflex. And this reflex is simply the idea that if you step on something or you touch something that's sharp or hot, the intention is not to stay on that sharp or the hot object. It's protective. So the sharp or hot object stimulates a neuron or a nerve cell to come into the spinal cord again and to stimulate other nerve cells to eventually cause a motor neuron to come out to stimulate the muscle, and this represents a muscle, to cause the finger to withdraw from the sharp object, the hot object, whatever it may be. Now, granted, if you were holding, instead of touching something sharp like a nail or a screw, if you were holding your grandmother's very, very fragile dish that you didn't realize had gotten hot by sitting on the stove, you would carefully take that dish and place it on the countertop and then pull your hands off the dish and run to the water to rinse them under cold water. You wouldn't just drop the dish. So that shows us that we have the ability to control reflexes by using our brain when we know we need to. And if we understand that concept, again, therapists can tap into that type of a system. And we can use noxious stimuli, not something that's super painful for a child, of course, but maybe a rough surface, something like Velcro, something that the child may want to pull their arm away from. And that's the beginning stage of withdrawal. And they begin to learn how to move a limb based on the stimulus, and then we take that one step further and we take that into activity. Primitive reflexes are the reflexes, as I said, that relate more to providing a stimulus and getting a whole body response or more gross limb responses. So some of the whole body responses that we think about are like a reflex that I'm showing here that's called the spinal gallant. If the child is lying normally just flat on their stomach and the legs are just sticking straight out and the arms are just relaxed at their face or at their side, you can take your finger and you can stimulate on the child's back and move down the back of the child on either side of the spine. And what that stimulus does is it causes a hip hike. It causes the child to move their pelvis or move their hip up in the direction of that stimulus. So that's purely reflexive. If that doesn't integrate properly, if a child leans against the back of a chair, the chair is going to constantly stimulate their back and they're going to constantly wiggle in their chair. If it does develop appropriately and it is integrated appropriately, the chair is not going to bother them when they lean against it, or it's not going to bother us when we lean against a chair. We're going to be able to sit still and not wiggle. So the idea behind that is we need to make sure that as we move through our environment, whatever the child touches or experiences, it's not going to cause this primitive reaction all the time. Other primitive reactions that are very common is something called an asymmetrical tonic neck reflex, which is called an ATNR. An ATNR is the reflex that when you turn your head in one direction, say to the right, your right arm will stick out and your left arm will bend. And I'm going to show you what that looks like. Oh, I'm going to show you what that looks like in a second. Oh my goodness. Okay, so I think that one of my slides got in the wrong place. Okay, that's okay. I can keep on moving. So if the child is going to experience this reflex, this ATNR reflex, that would therefore get in the way of certain activities. That would get in the way of them being able to reach forward for something if their head is still rotated slightly to the right. So they would want to reach for things then that are rotated, that are over on their right side. So we begin by holding a rattle maybe on the right side and let them use that reflex that they have, like the fencing response it's called. Let them turn their head to the right, let the right arm stick straight out along like a T against their body, and let the left arm come in so that the hand gets toward the back of their hand, so it's bent. And then put the rattle off to the right side, and the child can then reach it with that open, straightened right arm. And then gradually we try to teach the child to bring their head back towards midline, back in straight and neutral position, and at the same time bring both arms in that direction. So the arms are now coming in front of them where they can see them. So primitive reflexes, again, we can use the reflexes and then teach movement on top of that to help it become under voluntary control. Developmental milestones, as I explained before, those are going to be requiring certain types of descending influences, or what that means is input from the brain coming down to control what the spinal cord is doing so that we get proper movement patterns. The more that we fire our neurons together so that they wire together, the better we are going to be able to achieve certain skills. And I show you this picture of the snow because there's a book that's written that's called The Brain That Changes Itself by Norman Doidge. And in that book, one of the descriptors is they talk about the idea that neurons wiring together, and the reason for wanting them to do that is much like the soft snow, a first day of soft snow. So if you look at the skiing picture in the upper corner here, you see that the fresh snow allows you to go in any pathway that you want. You can take multiple pathways and you can try it out. You may find that some of it doesn't work, and you may find that, as in this little boy, he got stuck in his pathway, but you can overcome that and pick your sled back up and try another pathway. Or you can continue to ride the same pathway over and over again until you create a rut in that pathway, and you create your ditch. And what you find is that the more you do that pathway, it smooths up, it gets faster, and you keep going. Every time you get to the top of the hill, you get to the bottom of the hill even faster. That's comparable to what's happening with neurons. If we continue to use the same set or same groupings or pairs of neuronal pathways, or your nerve pathways in the brain and in the spinal cord, they begin to work better with each other. And when they work better with each other, the information doesn't require much to cause it to stimulate it, and to get it to actually create the motor response you want at the end. You no longer have a delay in how am I going to process this particular motor activity. I've practiced walking, for example, over and over again. Now I know how to do it. I can maybe advance to the next stage and learn to run. But before I ever learned how to walk, I probably stumbled a bit as I began to get up and try and release myself from the furniture and stop holding on to something when I walked. That took a while to get there. But once I got the skill, I can do it, and I can do it successfully every time, and I don't have to think about it anymore. And that's the idea behind what we're trying to get as therapists. We're trying to create what we call automatic or rhythmical types of movements, and these movements get stored inside of our brain and come out when we need them. We call them up when we're ready for that activity. Typically, in typical development, that will occur quickly. You don't even realize that you've kind of called up the file for reaching or the file for walking. It just happens. You think, I want to get something across the room, and you just get up and go get it. With our girls with Rett syndrome, that doesn't happen that way. They have dyspraxia, so there's a delay. So the processing time that's occurring inside the brain takes a little bit longer. We have to give them more time to respond. And in doing that, repetitively doing that with them, we're hoping that we're causing the neurons to fire together and wire together, and then be able to decrease or reduce that dyspraxia to try to make the response time quicker for each child. So in our sessions that we have in occupational therapy, we have to use, as I just described, we have to use our knowledge of the motor system. We have to use our knowledge of what stimulus does, what enrichment is. And we have to also think about what are the right cues for each child, so we're always tailoring our treatment to particular children. When we do our treatment with children also, we have to work with the child and with the family. We need to create together what are the goals that are necessary for this child. What's the overarching goal, and what are our specific goals, so that the child can decide when they're finished, or the parents can decide when they're finished with each particular goal that's being worked on. Maybe you're working on cup drinking, and once the child can successfully hold the cup and drink, even if it's just for short periods, maybe the parent has decided, now I want to move on and try a different activity in therapy, and I'll keep working on that at home. And those kinds of things need to be discussed between the parents and the therapists with just a collaborative team approach. So a child with limited or reduced amount of adequate proper movement in infancy will not develop in the typical time course or typical developmental time frame of our movement patterns. If a child has some sort of a trauma or injury that affects their interaction with the environment somewhere along their development, they will also have some problems with movement. if reflexes don't become integrated, or the reflexes that were integrated return, and I'm talking here about your primitive reflexes, they return after injury. So back to that idea of the spinal galant or the ATNR, the child learned how to not use that reflex, and then it comes back again. And then every time they turn their head to the right, for example, they reach out to that toy that is only on the right, and they can't get it anywhere else. So children that have these kinds of issues need OT. They need OT, and they need to be able to learn how to explore their own environment. If they don't, then we're going to continue to have, like I showed you here with this spiral, we're going to continue to have sort of this downward spiral. The more the child is unable to approach anything in his or her environment, the more that they're not going to be able to create the appropriate patterns inside the nervous system. And the more the appropriate patterns inside the nervous system aren't created, the less the child is going to move. And the less the child is going to move, the fewer pathways will be created, et cetera, and you just create a point where the child is not moving. And that's when we need to get the child, and not then, but that's essential. The child that's in that state absolutely needs therapy. And we hope to never get to the state of no movement. We hope to catch a child early on when we're seeing reflexes and seeing different forms of movement, even if it's not voluntarily being controlled, it's still movement, and we can create it and mold it and remodel the nervous system to get to the point where the child is moving with their own self-exploration. So this is the slide that I had thought was a little bit earlier when I was describing it. This is what we refer to in the primitive reflexes. This is called an ATNR. The child's head is rotated to the right. The arm is sticking out or straight on the right side, and the other side is bent. That affords a child that has that sort of thing. Here's a little baby with her sister, and the baby is able to reach for her sister's pigtails because of the ATNR. So you see that right there, cause and effect. I turn my head to the right, and I get to touch my sister. I do it repeatedly, and I can keep touching my sister or whatever is over there. If that reflex, though, doesn't become integrated as the pathways from the brain descend into the spinal cord to provide orders or commands to those neurons about when they should fire, then children end up in school, for example, where this little boy is unable to keep his paper in the center of his body, and here he is looking to the right, and his right arm is extended or straight, and his left arm is bent. Granted, not as extreme as you see in these pictures, but still that's showing that the reflex is still present and needs to be integrated. That child would be available for, the child would be benefit from occupational therapy in order to help him integrate. Other reflexes, like you can see here, where head position and body position causes the limbs to be in certain positions. So with the head down, the arms are bent, and with the head up, the arms are straightened. You see, as that reflex becomes integrated, the child is able to crawl. If that reflex isn't integrated, the head down posture causes you to have weakness in your postural muscles, and you begin to settle. You see children sit, this is a teenager, but you see children settling on a desk in order to write. They have their head down on the table, and they have much more difficulty maintaining an erect position. So these types of issues are able to be treated easily with occupational therapy. So I think what's really going to be interesting then to talk with you now is to let's talk a little bit about what is happening inside the brain. What are all the parts that are creating these movements for us? Well, we have a brain and a lot of what we call subcortical structures, structures that sit below the cortex, or the outer aspect of the brain. We have a cerebellum, and we have something called a brainstem, and then we have the spinal cord. And it's essential that all of these areas work together in order to create movement and coordinated movement. So what I want you to understand a little bit is what are the role and the parts of all of these systems. We know that the brain and the spinal cord are housed in bone. We have to really protect them. And that's the central nervous system. While the part that leaves the spinal cord and goes out to innervate our muscles, to connect with our muscles, to connect with glands, our skin, etc., that's called the peripheral nervous system. The pathways that we need from our brain down to our spinal cord and out to our muscles must all be coordinated, but they all have different roles. The role of the brain is varied. The brain is going to be important for all of our senses, to perceive all of our senses, to interpret it. It's going to be important for us to have make logical decisions, be able to do math concepts, our personality, our mood, our affect, all of that. So whether we're happy and sad, all of that happens inside of the brain. The brainstem has a little different role. The brainstem is really more responsible for, in addition to controlling some of what our organs do, the brain is responsible for what our face does, all the facial expressions, being able to show the joy, show anger, show surprise. It also is involved in helping us eat, so to chew and to talk, to move our tongue and our mouth. And those are some of the main areas that to think about that relate to OT. The cerebellum, that's important for coordination. We need the cerebellum to help us balance ourselves, to help with our equilibrium reaction so that we don't fall over. It's also important to help us if we were to be maybe in a windy area, say a windy parking lot with a bunch of papers, and the wind picks up the papers and carries them away from us. We will run after the papers. But if the paper settles to the ground because the wind stops, we're going to go to pick up that paper. But if the wind picks up again, it's going to take that paper someplace else for us. We're not going to go to that first stop where the paper landed. We're going to quickly change our direction and do that so that we can grab that piece of paper that's flying off in the wind. That's called changing the movement on the fly, and that's something the cerebellum is responsible for as well. The last thing that the cerebellum is responsible for that relates to these skills is moving from a one room, for example, into another room where there may be a threshold, and the threshold may be elevated. And when it's elevated, you may trip over it, or if you ever trip over steps as you're walking up steps in someone else's home that have a different height for the riser. The fact that you don't fall on your face is the responsibility of the cerebellum. The cerebellum will catch you, will give you a new response, a new motor response of throwing out your foot or whatever it may be to correct the error, so that you don't fall down. The spinal cord, as we've already discussed, is going to be responsible for some of your basic reflexes and providing all the motor cells, motor nerve cells that need to go out to your extremities, whether it's to give you reaching or whether it's to allow for walking and running. So the nervous system is really then comprised of multiple systems that must communicate with each other. If they don't communicate, then we're not going to connect the right systems and we're not going to get an effective movement. So the neurons then, therefore, are our worker bees. The neurons are the ones that are running all through and sitting in the nervous system in all of these different areas that I've described. And they're the ones that are going to be talking to each other. They're all the telephones. The neurons start off being basically bald when they're in development. And they're born and they have a cell body and they have something called an axon. And that's their long process that will connect up to another nerve cell. But during development, with the proper stimulation, they develop a bunch of processes. And these processes, if we look at them enlarged in this image, or even in this one, but we'll focus on this one and then a view here of just one of these enlarged in under a microscope, we can see that there's multiple spots where an axon, again, let's go back and look, this is the axon, where the axon, which is right here, can attach to maybe this part of this cell. And when it does that, it's going to provide a command or an order to that cell. But you're going to have thousands of axons coming to each nerve cell and providing commands. And the nerve cell then has to interpret all of those commands and decide what to do. So if these around here are called dendrites, and these are also dendrites. If the dendrites receive stimulation from an axon, right here, from another cell, they have to then interpret that, decide whether they're going to listen to that information, and then fire. And all of these endpoints down here would be nerve cell, the end of this axon or process that would then attach to other nerve cells and cause a divergence of that particular command. So multiple neurons will now be involved in multiple areas of the brain are going to be activated to allow for the brain, the brainstem, the cerebellum, the spinal cord all to work together. They all need to be active. And so that's basically the way our brain works. Here's a picture of a brain with a lot of these nerve cells being activated, and they will send their projections down into the spinal cord. Again, hopefully this image is becoming more familiar, into the spinal cord. And here are some of these pathways that we have up here coming down into the spinal cord. They're connecting with the nerves that sit inside the spinal cord. Those nerves then go out of the spinal cord as the peripheral nervous system and connect back up to the muscle to get the muscle to move. So the neurons are key. They're our major communication. They're just waiting to be stimulated so that they can jump into action. So what are our initial forms of neuronal activation? Initially, we just stare at the mom. We get, a baby will stare at the mother. They'll get all this great visual input, auditory input, hearing her talk, and that will make that baby maybe want to reach out for the mom's face and begin to have self-initiated exploration. So stimulation, what is that? I just said it was visual. It can also be auditory, but can it also be exercise? And can it be enrichment, such as looking at a mobile that has music to it, or just lots of different kinds of objects? What makes them different? Well, they're all the same in some ways, but different in this one way. Exercise, just plain exercise, running on a treadmill, is going to increase blood supply to certain areas of the brain as well as your muscles. Enrichment does a little bit more than that. Enrichment also upregulates other chemicals inside the nervous system, or proteins in the nervous system, that are important for neurons connecting with each other, for neurons to make synapses. One of these proteins is brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and we know that that protein is misregulated in Rett syndrome. We know that enrichment can upregulate, and we know that I've shown, and others have shown as well, that with the enrichment in multiple models of injury, we can get animals to move again, and in clinical studies, people to be able to move again by upregulating these missing proteins to allow for neurons to fire and wire together. So the exercising on the treadmill, as I said, primarily this is just a representation of blood vessels, primarily just causes an increase in blood vessel activity to certain areas, brain, spinal cord. That's referred to as medical term angiogenesis. In enrichment, though, we have widespread type of response. The neurons are going to respond by making more connections. The central nervous system becomes more awake. Cells that are supporting neurons, called glial cells, become activated in a different way, and muscles will respond in a different way. And then, as I said, the neurotrophic factor, or the protein called BDNF, is also upregulated or stimulated to appear when you have enrichment as opposed to just straight exercise. So what makes all of these really different? I think I've explained a little bit of the idea of why enrichment seems to be a little bit better, but having visual stimulation, auditory stimulation, exercise, and enrichment can all come together in play. Play provides us with, or provides a child with, all of these ideas. Exercise, maybe they're running or they're jumping over things. Enrichment is the stimulation that they're getting from the activity, and then the visual and auditory feedback that they're receiving. So in OT, we can stimulate play in multiple ways. We can stimulate play to improve fine motor skills and gross motor skills, to improve postural reactions, to improve their coordination and quality of their movement, to improve any visual perceptual difficulties that they may have, as well as all of their activities of daily living, such as eating and drinking and bathing, and of course play. Sometimes we need, though, to adapt the environment, that just simply trying to bank on improving movement through the techniques OTs use isn't all that's necessary for the child. Sometimes we have to add some adaptive equipment, such as in feeding. We may want to provide a child with what's referred to as a universal cup, something that they can put a spoon into if they don't have good grasping. So we can still teach feeding without worrying about whether the child actually can hold on to the spoon. We also can increase the type of handle of the spoon. And so if we increase the circumference of the handle of the spoon, a child that has a weaker grasp or just can't grasp as well can use a larger handled spoon so that they're able to hold on to it, and even with hand-over-hand guidance might be able to bring some food to the mouth. And there are other versions of a universal cuff, as I'm showing you here, just other things that are kind of fun and sort of glitzy for a child to use. We also have special plates that allow the child to scoop the spoon over towards the edge of the plate, the rim of the plate, so that they can let the plate help them to scoop onto their spoon or onto their fork. And then finally, for the children that are able to move their head but really don't have good control of their limbs that would allow them to successfully bring food to their mouth without having a lot of failures in the process. There's also adaptations called a Winsford feeder. And the Winsford feeder kind of works like the old phonograph, where the plate will turn slowly when you want it to by controlling it with this little joystick that's controlled by the cheek. And the Winsford feeder will scoop the food for you and bring the food up to your mouth. This is sort of like the lever of the needle of the phonograph arm, but it has a spoon attached to the end of it, and it will elevate the spoon to the level of the mouth, and then all the child needs to do is reach forward to get the food off of the spoon. And you can also have a cup holder there that the child can lean forward and drink from the straw if the child is capable of doing that. So as I asked before, who needs OT? Anyone that needs help in any of the areas that I've just described. And for the kids that are referred to us, they're referred to us for a variety of reasons. Often children that have Rett syndrome are referred because they have not developed appropriately. They didn't go through the typical developmental milestones, so there's been a delay, or maybe there's been a regression. Some children don't fail to thrive, or they don't eat in a good way, and so they need to learn how to feed themselves, or how to learn to chew, and therefore they would also need OT. Arm-hand use may not be within normal limits, and there may be some coordination problems. This may lead to them having difficulty learning how to play, how to dress, how to feed, and if that's the problem, then we have other issues that may develop later on in the school environment if they don't receive OT at the proper time frame. Sensory input is going to lead to motor output. So as I said, we need to provide increased and varied stimuli in order to get children to move the way we want them to move, in order to achieve certain skills. This stimulation is going to require, or it's going to, I'm sorry, not require, but it's going to cause some underlying changes that will occur inside of the nervous system, and that's referred to as remodeling of the nervous system. And we can get that in part by upregulating brain-derived neurotrophic factor, but also from many other ways. OT interventions that involve enriching environments are ones that are going to vary stimulation. They're going to vary the intended motor control so that you can get motor skills that are going to be able to be used in multiple situations, known as generalization. The intervention is going to be meaningful. It's going to be interesting. It's going to motivate the child to want to respond. And the typical interventions that are going to be used theoretically, or the theories of them, are the NGT, SI, and constraint-induced movement therapy, maybe. So neurodevelopmental therapy is a type of therapy that we use that really has the intention of making sure that we provide appropriate handling techniques to get the child to move in the way we want them to move. We have to be consistent with it, we have to be repetitive, and we have to vary the motion. If we do all of that, whatever we provide for the child, whether it's an activity as you're seeing here where the child's on a ball and they're trying to reach for this toy, or they're here placing rings onto a stack, whatever the activity is, the activity needs to be creatively tailored to that child. So the child wants to do it, and it's motivating, and it gets them to do something else. Maybe this child has been learning to use a walker. As you can see here, we take them away from the walker and show them how we actually can use your body, and you can learn to move, and you can learn to balance, and you can learn to have your postural responses, and you can learn to get what you want without falling over. Sensory integration therapy is a therapy that uses, instead of handling, it really wants to incorporate what the child wants to do, improving processing and integration of the sensory input for the child to direct that therapy. Well, that's a little hard with children with Rett syndrome, because with Rett syndrome, the therapist has to guide more. The therapist has to help the child initiate the movement. And that's okay, because eventually with that, the child will begin to learn a skill that you want them to learn. And I did a study several years back looking at a modified view of sensory integration in Rett syndrome. The little girl that I was working with was a young child who we were trying to get her to learn how to interact with toys and to stop mouthing her hands. And she had Rett syndrome where she did more mouthing than she did ringing. And what we did is we provided a lot of sensory therapy with her during the week, 4 days a week, for about an hour a day. And at the end of each week, what we did was we set her up in front of a favorite toy that she had that was a battery-operated toy that had some music to it, and we gave her a single switch. And what we wanted her to do was touch the single switch to activate the toy. What we found is that with the sensory stimulation that we were providing, this modified sensory integration therapy, we found that providing that 4 days a week for an hour over time, over a 16-week study, this graph right here is showing the number of times that she was able to reach for the switch over the 16 weeks, and this is showing the number of minutes, or the time period at which, over the 16 weeks, at which she was able to keep her hands out of her mouth. So what you're basically seeing is this is the line, is an average line of where she was at an early time point, with before the treatment started, during treatment, and after treatment. And this one point, she was actually not feeling well just prior to this appointment, so that we had to run the study anyway that day, but we're not so sure that that really is a valid response that particular day. But what you're seeing by looking at this is that the number of times she reached for the switch increased as we progressed through the study. And she spent more of her time more of her time above her average line than below the average line. So initially, she was not able to always reach at what was her average point. But as the study progressed, and the sensory stimulation allowed her to reach more above average time points. So she was reaching 15, 20 times for that switch. And what we were really excited about is that correlated over time with the amount of time, minutes, that she spent not hand-mouthing. So by the end of the study, she was spending on average 10, 12 minutes not hand-mouthing, where initially she could only go about 5 minutes without hand-mouthing. I completed a similar study but used animal model for this one, and I looked at some mice, and I looked at them in a variety of sensory stimulating environments, and these stimulating environments had the effect of either providing, this is molasses, providing a lot of texture and stretch sensations to their limbs, as well as just fun things to do, picking at sunflower seeds, climbing, running on sand, climbing on a slinky, running on ping pong balls. And what we found are the animals that were exposed to all of these environments, when we tested them for tremor, which all the animals that have Rett syndrome, the mice that I work with that have Rett syndrome, they all tremor. When we tested them on a test for tremor, we found that normal animals have very little tremor, and that's what's noted by the green area. The pink and the red are showing you the animals that either were never saw the enrichment, is the red line, or saw the enrichment and had Rett. So these are both the Rett syndrome animals. The red ones, the red line, are the animals that had Rett syndrome but didn't see enrichment, and the pink line are the animals that you see here, the ones that were with Rett syndrome and had the enrichment. And what we were surprised to see initially was that normal animals, we knew, didn't tremor, but the enrichment didn't seem to stop the amount of tremor when you were testing tremor alone. However, when we moved that to a different situation and we tested them on an actual functional task, such as going to a balance beam, what you can see here is that the animal right here is an animal that was exposed to enriched experiences. These two animals were not. And what you're going to notice is that the animals that was exposed to the enriched experience was able to climb across this balance beam without any difficulties. He walks right across. There's very little movement of the balance beam. If you look at this animal, however, you're seeing that the balance beam is shaking. He's having a great difficulty walking across. And another animal that also was not exposed to the enriched experiences also is having difficulty and is actually using his limbs by walking under the balance beam. And there's a lot of bouncing and shaking of the balance beam you can see, which is all of their tremor. So this is showing us that the sensory integration therapy, modified as it was, even in animals, is showing some improvement in motor abilities, that they, while they still may have the tremor, they are able to compensate for that, and when they need to move, they're able to overcome that tremor and move smoothly and more typically. So NDT, SI, these modified sensory integration, serve as forms of practice, repeated practice. But are there other ways to repeat practice? There's another type of therapy called constraint-induced movement therapy, where we constantly sort of force one limb to move so that we can get movement. It's typically used in people with stroke, where one limb has now been affected and it's not working as well, so they force the affected limb and hold down the unaffected limb. We can do that sort of thing with OT. And with children with Rett syndrome. Here's a girl with Rett syndrome that's reaching for a toy. What you can sort of see right here is that the person, the caregiver's hand, is holding on to her hand so that she doesn't ring, as she's doing here. So with the hand held, which is sort of an idea of constraint-induced, just gently held, she sees and reaches for, so she sees the ball, she reaches for the ball, she gets the ball, she pulls it off, and then she has it, and then we work again on getting her to put the objects back onto the ring. Similarly, she can reach for, with the hand held down, she can reach for a ball, and she can place it into the this cylinder. And when the ball actually goes into the cylinder, as you can see here, she finally is able to drop it in the cylinder, a musical sound occurs, and so she gets a response. She gets some kind of a reward. Similarly, again, with the hand held down, she can operate a single switch, and the single switch will control some computer activity, some computer game. And so she can play and move whatever is happening on the computer and cause different things to occur, and continue to watch and decide when she wants to move to another game simply by controlling the switch if the one hand is simply held down. Interestingly enough, when you move to feeding, which seems to be a very powerful reward for this girl with Rett syndrome, the hand doesn't have to be held down. She does it naturally. Initially, she had her hand held down a little bit with a Velcro strap, and then we were able to release that over time, and she can reach for a fork, grab the fork, bring the food to her mouth, and she can do the same thing with a cup. Again, this hand is no longer being held. The caregiver's hands are right here, and they're helping her with her OT goals of cup drinking. So to achieve precise use of the arms, we need to engage in reaching activities. And as I said, they have to be varied. They have to change. We can do this in a variety of ways, and we know that we want to always seek something that the child wants to do, some cause and effect. Reaching will not only allow the child to be successful in a task, that's something that they want to reach for, it's also going to improve their ability to control their torso. I'm currently doing a study that is a virtual reality study that's looking at reaching. We're using girls that are a little bit older, anywhere from 7 to 50, and I'm doing the study in collaboration with my colleague at WashU in St. Louis, Jack Engsberg. And if you're interested in this, you can certainly ask me more about this study. But what we're doing is we're training somebody to reach for an object, or really we're reaching for a game that's on a monitor. The whole idea is that we're training someone to move their body in order to cause an activity that's on the computer to work. So there's all these free gaming devices or free games that you can get on the internet, and we download those and we connect it with the software program that we have. And the idea is that we're causing the child, so here is the software program that sees the person's body and makes it into a stick figure. And there's a game going on the computer screen. In this case, it's a rocket. The rocket goes off and fireworks go. The way to make the rocket go off is the child goes from having their hands together, that they're wringing their hands, to separating their hands at whatever parameter we set, a little bit of a separation or a great big separation, as you see here. Whatever that is, that connects into the computer, and it will interrupt the space bar, which would typically control this game. So instead of having to touch the space bar to get the rocket to go off, we simply open up. The child has to separate their hands, and that then interrupts the computer and causes the fireworks to go off. The interruption is the connect system. That's what we're using to detect body changes. So this activity we're starting it. It's running now in St. Louis and in the Rockville, Maryland area with me. Other activities that we can think about and look at relate to adjunctive therapies. I told you that I would come back to that a little bit. HIPAA therapy is one of the adjunctive therapies that I'm going to mention today. And with HIPAA therapy, a study that I did many years ago with Jill Wagner, who's a physical therapist who's standing in this image right here, we looked at the horse. What is it that the horse does? The horse imparts, as it moves, imparts that movement to the rider. If we put the child onto a horse, a child with Rett syndrome, as you see here, and the horse is then walked around an arena, the movement of the horse's pelvis is similar to the movement of our pelvis. So it's going to impart the correct motions into the child's pelvis and therefore instill or alert the muscles in the torso to respond to that movement so that the child does not fall over and they gain postural support. What we found in this study is that at the beginning and end of each study, we had the child walk up the mounting steps to mount or to get up onto the horse. We found that within one session, the child required more assistance to mount the stairs before the HIPAA therapy session than after the HIPAA therapy session, which means that the horse imparted good stimulation to the child that allowed them to have better postural control. And that was a key point that I just wanted to mention about what happened with this study. Just anecdotally, some of the other areas is that parents reported that they saw the child performing certain activities at home better. So what is the meaning of activity? The meaning of activity and enrichment is to provide lots of sensory stimulation. Let it be varied. Let it be rewarding. Let it be meaningful. Let it motivate the child so that they have the incentive to get up and move, to reach for something, to get someone's attention. The ultimate is that if we can access multiple sensory systems, we can cause the areas of the brain to start communicating and working together. And that's key to development and key to treatment in occupational therapy. So with all of the stimulation, we're expecting or suggesting that the neurotrophic factor, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, the correct proteins are upregulating. They're causing the neurons inside the brain to communicate permanently with each other to create all the connections that we need, and therefore to increase motor function. And we're hoping that that then stays. And there has been suggestion in studies that if we introduce a treatment and an intervention, and then we stop it for a period of time, and then we introduce it again, the child goes through periods of time where with the intervention they do really well. Without the intervention they may lose some skills, but the positive part is the reinstitution of that stimulation brings the skills back up to where they were, and then they are allowed, that child is allowed to continue to advance their skills. So the studies do suggest, as I just said, this discontinuing of treatment and the reinstitution of treatment will support motor recovery. But we still need to do more studies, both clinically and in the basic science world with animals, in order to identify the proper dosing of treatment. Do we need treatment 5 days a week? Can we do it 3 days a week? Can we do it sporadically, 1 week on, 1 week off? What is the real parameter for treatment? And studies need to be done to try to figure that out. So that is, oh, I'm so sorry. That is the end of what I wanted to talk with you about today. But what I do want you to see is that there have been many people who have supported this research that I've been doing over the years, and I'm going to try to quickly, I apologize, quickly go back to the very last slide and show you that Rett Syndrome .org, for example, is supporting the virtual reality work that I'm doing now, and other work has been supported by the National Capital Area Rehabilitative Research Network, as well as the Virginia Federation of Independent Colleges. I also have had numerous graduate students working with me on various aspects of the work that I've shown to you, whether it's the clinical work or the basic science work. And I'm indebted to them. Oh, it happened again. It won't go through. It doesn't want to stay on that last slide. Let me see if I can do it this way, just so that you can see all of the wonderful places that have provided me support. So here's the National Capital Area Rehabilitative Research Network, Rett Syndrome.org, the Virginia Federation of Independent Colleges, and here's a list of some of the students and some of the faces of some of the graduate students who have worked for me. So thank you very much for your attention today. I am so pleased that I was able to talk with you, and I hope that I can answer your questions.
Oh, Pam, thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. We are so thrilled. I can't tell you the number of comments that came in during your presentation about how encouraging people are feeling and excited they're feeling to see your research. That you know, what we intuitively know is important for our girls is playing out in your research, and we really wish you and all of your colleagues continued success in what you're doing. We have a number of questions that have come into the queue, and we have about another 5-10 minutes planned for the webinar today. So if we can address some of those questions live, that would really benefit everybody. And then again, a reminder, submit your questions by text, and we will work with Pam to get them answered via QA document that we can circulate afterwards. So if that's okay, Pam, can I start with a question? Can you share with our attendees today how old your sister is, and if she's been a willing participant in any of your research work?
Yes, she actually will be a part of, I think, a part of the virtual reality study. My sister is 50. So she just turned 50 this past March. And she lives at home with my parents and has a caregiver that's there about 50 hours a week, I think it is.
Wow.
So yeah, so she, and over the years since I went to OT school, I spent my whole life going to therapy with her. She was treated at Kennedy Krieger since 1965. And so I have, as a therapist, every time I learned something new in OT school, I would come home and try it out and see how it worked. So I've always been a very, had a strong role in helping to figure out what was the right thing to do for her from a therapeutic perspective. So yeah, she is at times a guinea pig for me, but she's wonderful.
All right. Well, we thank you and her for all of your work. Thanks. Okay. Thank you for sharing that. That's just so encouraging and motivating for me and for everybody. We have a lot of parents of younger children and newly diagnosed kids who are listening today, so I wanted you to be sure to share that. Okay, so a couple questions that we have. Just practically, parents are asking where they can get some of the devices and adapted equipment that you showed, particularly the spoon, but some of the other things. Should they just talk to their OTs about that, or is there a good online resource for people to get some of these things to use in their home?
Yeah, there are a lot of online resources, but certainly talk to their OT about what the right device would be. Some therapists, depending on what the child is doing, the child may need a universal cuff because they have poor grasping responses, or other children may benefit from a longer handled spoon or a wider handled spoon, or a spoon that has a curve to it, so that if the child is unable to turn their hand to get a fork or a spoon in that's straight, then I can try to go back to what I'm saying. Let me see if I can do that really quick. To run back to one of these other slides. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this quickly or not. The spoon has a bent handle, it's called, and I'm not able to find what I can't find it really quickly. The bent-handled spoon is one that can be used if a child is having trouble getting, here it is. Whoops. It's going to come up in a sec. There it is. So here's a bent-handled spoon. So this is a straight spoon. Some children will be able to use a straight spoon just like you or I would once they have help grasping it. And they can turn their spoon to get it into their mouth in the proper way. Other children aren't able to do that, and an OT would help to decide that. Some children need what we call a bent-handled spoon. And that is one that the child can keep their hand in basically the same position and still get the food up to the mouth because the spoon is bent towards their mouth rather than having to move their arm that way. But I would speak with your OTs first, but you can certainly Google these types of spoons online. You can look for adapted spoon, might be one way to find it. There are multiple companies that provide these kinds of spoons, and they can be purchased, for the most part, for under $10.
Great, thank you. Another question some families have is their children don't seem to be really interested in toys. And so their have some questions for you about different ideas for motivating activities or things that they can use during the OT session if toys don't really seem to have interest. Food, of course, is a very motivating thing for a lot of our kids, but what are some other ideas and things you've come across that work with our kids with Rett syndrome?
So I found that music works really well. So music, and if there's a particular, whether it's a Disney movie or whatever, wherever they are with their development, whatever type of movie they're interested in, Sesame Street for the little ones often works. Anything that has music that's attached to it, I found to be very successful. And it can be either that you play music, and music can be the motivating factor that you do this activity, and then the music gets to we play the music for a few minutes, or we play the music while you're doing the activity. It just depends on what the child likes for motivation. I also find that you can use food as a reward. So maybe it's not just the feeding session, the lunch or the breakfast or dinner session, but it's actually the toy, the time that you're trying to teach the child how to play. And you can have the motivation that as they begin to even look at the toy, they show an interest, then they get a bite of the cookie or whatever it is, a piece of cracker or Cheerio. And so it's called grading the activity, and you can grade it forward, you can grade it backwards. So that means if the child either has the last step of the activity completed, and then you're gradually working on them starting from the square one and moving up to the last step, or you go the other direction. You work at the beginning of the activity, like I just said, just looking at the toy, and you reward them for that, and then you move even further. Now they didn't just look for the toy, maybe now they moved forward towards the toy, and you reward them for that. You're training the system how to work. They don't necessarily know that they should be playing with the toy, and you need to train them that that's a great thing to do, and that's really fun. But you have to teach them that that is fun, and the only way to do that is to reward them along the way in a stepwise fashion. Does that make sense?
Great. Yeah, it does to me. For the folks who are asking those questions, if that made sense, let me know. And if you have a follow-on question, go ahead and submit it through the queue. And we have a couple questions. If you can clarify or revisit some of your points on contrasting increasing functional ability with fine motor skill with reducing the hand stereotypy. So parents are really fascinated with that aspect of your research. And in the 16-week study, it showed great improvement while treatment was happening. And then you talked about how when treatment is taken away and then reintroduced, that you can have a return to a better fine motor skill. Mm-hmm. If the treatment is eliminated completely, do you see sustained improvement? And I'm just going to go ahead because we're getting in under time. Kind of another piece of question that people are asking is for our teens and adults, commenting that a lot of OTs seem to lose interest or belief that the therapy is improving because there was a regression, loss of skills, holding cups, self-feeding in childhood, and they've had a difficult time regaining those skills as teens or adults. So do you believe that OT should be a lifelong intervention. I hope this kind of makes sense. I'm trying to get a
Yes.
number of questions.
Yeah, it does. So
Okay.
yes, I do. I think that OT needs to be a lifelong intervention. And I think that's part of what we have to do for future research is figure out exactly what the dosing needs to be. How often do we need to come back in? Does it have to be daily? Does it have to be weekly? What is it that we need to do? I think that one of the important things that is upsetting to me with therapy, therapists when they quote unquote drop a client, is that if the children have dyspraxia, we need to give them, there's some research that shows that we need to give them at least a 9-second delay between when you have provided your command to when the child actually responds. And if you don't wait that delay quietly, you're not necessarily going to see a response. So if you tell the child to do something and then before that time period is up, you say it again, the child is busy trying to process it the first time. And now they got interrupted because you just asked them something else and they're trying to process it again. And then you decide, well, they're not doing this, so you take the toy away. Just as the neurons were just firing, they were just ready to get going, and they might have reached for that toy in the next second or two, but the toy's now gone. And over time, if that keeps happening, the child decides, why should I bother? Because I don't get the toy anyway. I got all ready to get it, and then it's taken away from me, and I don't have the ability to say I want the toy back. So I believe strongly that we need to give them time and we need to figure out what is the activity, what is the motivating thing for that child. If it's food, like I already described, use that to get a stepwise fashion to let them learn how to participate in an activity. But yes, if we stop an activity, is what I'm saw in the research, and we just go a little bit, like a couple of weeks beyond that, then the skill level seems to remain. But beyond that, we seem to then lose the skill, as I showed in the animal studies. The skill level drops off and they start looking like the animal studies, the animals that had Rett syndrome with the enrichment start looking like animals that had Rett syndrome that never got the enrichment. But if you reinstitute the enrichment, the animals go back to being more like normals. So I really believe that there is an idea that we can catch the system before it's, don't let it bottom out. But even if it does, we can improve it again. But it might be that we need some kind of a steady state to keep a steady learning curve for the child.
Great, thank you. I support that greatly. So in closing, I have a question. Did you, in one of your slides, did you show the reference for the hippotherapy article? A few people asked about that.
The hippotherapy article. The hippotherapy study that I did?
Uh-huh. Has anything been published?
No, no, I did not show a reference for that. And the reference has not, it's only been published in proceedings of science of the conference where it went, where it was presented. It hasn't been published in a journal yet. Okay.
When it gets published, we'll be sure to promote it to all of our community because it's really helpful in therapies to have published studies to take to
the aim is hopefully for everybody. The aim is that it will be published sometime in 2016.
Fantastic. Okay, I think what we'll do is we'll close with this final question, which is if families are interested in enrolling in your research study, can you get us an enrollment flyer and we'll make sure that we get it up on our website and out to our attendees today?
Sure. Great. Absolutely. In fact, I think it's already there somewhere. I think I sent it. I think I sent it to Janice.
Yeah, you did. In fact,
send it again. Absolutely, that would be fabulous. We would love for more people to be involved in the study.
Yeah. So I'll just give a plug. We did just start a brand new web page on our website. If you go to rettsyndrome.org under For Families, you'll see a section called Contributing to Research. And we've segmented it out with clinical trials and non-drug clinical research, and we encourage everyone. Pam will get your study up there. We just created this page, so people will be able to go there and download the enrollment flyer and know how to connect with you. And I also wanted to underscore the importance of continuing to contribute to databases on Rett syndrome. So we have links to the ones that rettsyndrome.org is funding, InterRett and RettBase. Researchers continuously pull from natural history study data and databases and are continuing to learn about our children, especially with genotype, phenotype information, which Pam, you didn't really touch on in your presentation, which I appreciate, because I think what you're saying is this is a global intervention that, regardless of mutation or deletion, works, right?
Right, and actually with the modified SI therapy study that we did, we actually had two girls at totally different levels of skill, and they both had Rett syndrome, and one was an ambulator and one was not so much an ambulator, as well as other skills, and we found that they both benefited, but benefited in different ways.
Fantastic. Those are all wonderful, wonderful thoughts to conclude on today. We will go ahead and get you the questions that we didn't get to, and we'll circulate your answers to everybody who attended. Thank you so much for this incredible presentation, and thank you for your ongoing commitment to all of our girls and women with Rett syndrome. I know you're helping us all make a difference today for our kids, and the incredible research on neurohabilitation is an unexplored area and one we're very interested in investing in. Thank you for partnering with us.
Well, thank you, and you're welcome. I so appreciate having the time to be able to share my work.
Thank you, and we'll continue to invite you back to share new updates and discoveries as you go along. Thank you, Pam. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Reminder, today's session was recorded, and we will be sending you a link via email so that you can go back, share this presentation with your local team. We hope that now that you've availed yourself of this information, that you'll be able to put it to good use in your lives. Thank you very much for your support of RettSyndrome.org. We want to thank our sponsors, Tobii Dynavox and Ameripride, for allowing us to bring you these webinars at no charge. And we appreciate your support. For those of you in the U.S., have a great 4th of July weekend. Enjoy the rest of your summer and whatever season it is for our attendees around the world. We hope you're well, and we look forward to seeing you again at a future webinar or in-person conference next summer in June 2016. Thank you very much, and this concludes today's webinar. Bye-bye.